Hello, it's John Heaton, and today I'm going to try and rank my favourite Fleetwood Mac solo albums. I'm going to take it from what's in my collection, and I must admit, if you've watched my channel, you'll know I probably gravitate towards the Buckingham Nicks McVie era of Fleetwood Mac. But having said that, I was listening to a couple of Peter Green solo albums in the car today, in the Little Dreamer 1980 and In the Skies from 1979, which I thought were pretty enjoyable, but I don't have them in my collection and they don't feature in my listing. I've actually got 15 Fleetwood Mac solo albums and I've chosen my top 8. Not going to tell you what missed the list because that would spoil what's actually on the list. But before I start on the list, I would just like to point out a couple of albums which are not in scope. Buckingham Nicks, obviously it's not a Fleetwood Mac solo album because there's two members of Fleetwood Mac contributing, but it's a bit unfortunate that this album, when I did my Fleetwood Mac album rankings, it wouldn't have featured, and it didn't feature. I think I did one, and it's not featuring here, so it kind of falls between two stools, but it's a very enjoyable album, and to this day, very mysteriously, never released on CD. Not that people buy CDs anymore, but it's not on Spotify either. This was a 1973 duet album from Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks when they were still a couple. And then we've got the album which came out a few years ago from Lindsey Buckingham and Christine McVie, just entitled Lindsey Buckingham, Christine McVie. And again, it's a duet. In fact, for all intents and purposes, this is a Fleetwood Mac album because it's got Mick Fleetwood and John McVie as the rhythm section. So only Stevie Nicks is missing, and considering they called Say You Will a Fleetwood Mac album with Christine McVie the only one of the 5 missing, I think there's a bit of inconsistency there, but maybe it's because they didn't want to tour on the back of it. Fleetwood Mac didn't want to tour on the back of it, should I say, because these two did do a few dates together. But anyway, it's a very enjoyable album. It's not quite as consistent as Buckingham Nicks for me, but it's up there. Anyway, so I just thought I'd cover those two. So now I'm going to start with my top 8 Fleetwood Mac solo albums in reverse order. Number 8, I've got Mick Fleetwood, The Visitor from 1981. This is a very enjoyable album. It's not completely brilliant, but it's got a few big highlights. Peter Green guests on one of the tracks as vocalist and guitar, and then I think it's George Hawkins does some great vocals on You Weren't in Love and Walk a Thin Line, and Walk a Thin Line features some lovely slide guitar from George Harrison. So those two tracks alone are enough for me to put this in my top listing. I've got one of his other solo albums, but this is the one to check out if you want to check out some Mick Fleetwood solo. He's not singing on the tracks, he gets people to sing for him. Number 7, we've got the recent Lindsey Buckingham solo album, which I thought was a return to form and actually more consistent and more enjoyable than his last several albums. And I could have put this one higher, but again, it's not completely consistent. It's got some very big highlights and it's a very pleasant listen. So that's at number 7. At number 6, I've got The Wild Heart from 1982, or was it 3? 1983, The Wild Heart from Stevie Nicks. Don't have this on vinyl for some reason, never picked it up. Again, it's not a brilliantly consistent album, but it's got a few absolute gems. If Anyone Falls on side 1 is magic. Enchanted is absolutely brilliant rocking song with the piano and the great guitar solo. We got people like Wally Watchell playing on this album who'd played on Buckingham Nicks all those years ago, so she knew him pretty well. Stand Back was a big hit single, which is on here, good track. And there's another, I Will Run to You, another duet with Tom Petty, which is following on from the duet they did on Belladonna. So it's a pretty enjoyable album. That's number 6. At number 5, we've got Go Insane, the 1984 release from Lindsey Buckingham. And this had a couple of sort of minor hit singles in the US, I think. Didn't do much in the UK, but Slow Dancing and Go Insane, the title track, were singles, I think, in the US. I Must Go is a big highlight for me. Loving Cup is another album highlight for me, as is Bang the Drum. DW Sweet is nice at the end. Play in the Rain is probably the weak link of this album, both parts, at the end of side 1 and the beginning of side 2. But other than that, I Want You as a good starter. It's a bit 80s in its sound, but then, as people are going to point out, it was released in the 80s, so what do you expect? But it's not too much synthesizer. There's some real guitars and real drums on it, as far as I remember. I don't remember who is the band on here, but I don't think the other members of Fleetwood Mac are guesting on that particular album. Then we've got number 4, Belladonna from 1981. I do have this on vinyl somewhere, but I couldn't find it. I remember being in the shops in Rugby and at a record shop and just seeing a new release from Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham and thinking, which one do I buy first? Because I really was a big fan of Tusk at the time. This was sometime in the fall of 81, I guess. I think I'm right in saying it was the fall. And I think I ended up getting Law and Order from Lindsey first and then this shortly afterwards. But this is a fine album. Again, not 10 out of 10 for every track, but Stop Dragging My Heart Around, the duet with Tom Petty, is top notch. And Think About It, I think, is dedicated to Christine McVie. I don't think the other members of Fleetwood Mac are on here, are they? I don't think so. But Don Henley, who dated Stevie Nicks for a while back in those days, or before this album came out, I think, is duetting on Leather and Lace to great effect. So they alternate singing the lead vocal and then they join together singing harmony on the chorus. And it's very effective. Probably the best track on the album. Edge of 17 is a great one to play loud. Very successful. The title track is nice. Think About It, I think, is an old Fleetwood Mac song from the time of Rumours, if I remember rightly. The Highwaymen is a nice closer. So yeah, it's a pretty solid album, and Stevie's best in my opinion. Number 3, we've got Law and Order from Lindsey Buckingham, and this is, I mean, whilst it doesn't start off brilliantly with Buana, the second track on side 1 is Absolute Magic Trouble, where Mick Fleetwood is guesting on drums, and there's a very amusing video which you should check out if you haven't seen. Mary Lee Jones is not my favourite, the third track, but then the 4th track, I'll tell you now, is just a gorgeous ballad with a gorgeous feel to it, really laid back and wonderful guitar and harmonies. And It Was I is a very melodic closer to side 1, and we've got side 2 opening with the cover of September Song, the famous song, and that's pretty decent. Shadow of the West features Christine McVie on kind of ghostly backing vocals, and then That's How We Do It in LA is a sort of quirky rocker in the style of Tusk. Johnny Stew is okay, not much to write home about there. Love From Here, Love From There, same, inoffensive, not bad. And then Satisfied Mind, a great cover of that song, but I forget who wrote it, but how many times have you heard someone say, if I had his money, I'd see things my way. But suddenly it happened, I lost every dime, but I'm richer by far with a satisfied mind. Bob Dylan covered this on the Saved album, but I think Lindsey's version is more pleasing to the ear, shall we say, and I prefer it, if I'm honest. So that was Law and Order, 1981. Number 2, we've got Christine McVie's 1984 self-titled, and this is much better. She released another solo album about 10 years ago, I guess, and that wasn't much, but this one is really, really quite enjoyable. Steve Ferrone is on drums, I seem to remember. Steve Winwood is guesting on vocals and keyboards on a couple of tracks. Love Will Show Us How is a very good lead-off song. I think that was a single, and Got a Hold on Me, which leads off side 2, certainly was a single. Who's Dreaming This Dream features Lindsey Buckingham on backing vocals, or joint lead vocals, really. And then One in a Million features Steve Winwood, as I've said. The Challenge features Eric Clapton, so she's got a lot of her friends to help out. George Hawkins is playing guitar, and Todd Sharp is playing on this album as well. I forget which instrument he plays. Is it guitar and vocals? Sorry, George Hawkins is playing bass and vocals. And I really enjoy this album. It's it's probably more enjoyable for me than Mirage from Fleetwood Mac, or on a par, certainly of the same standard in my opinion. Number one, can you guess what it is? It's 1992's Out of the Cradle release from Lindsey Buckingham, and this, for my knowledge, I've never seen it on vinyl. I'm on the lookout for it. It probably would have to be a double album because it's quite a lengthy affair, and that would be my only criticism of it. It goes on a bit too long, and some of the tracks I would have ditched. For example, the one which is reminiscent of Big Love, forgetting what it's called. Well, This Is the Time I would have ditched. Doing What I Can I would have ditched. Turn It On I would have ditched. Those three. But other than that, this album is solid gold. I mean, the introduction, very nice guitar instrumental. Then Don't Look Down is a great track. Play that one loud. And then Wrong, which allegedly was aimed at Mick Fleetwood, we don't know for sure. And then Countdown is just a gorgeous Lindsey Buckingham song in the style of Steal Your Heart Away, that kind of Fleetwood Mac. Really nice melody, lovely guitar playing as always. All My Sorrows, gorgeous cover of that song. Soul Drifter, 5 out of 5, top 5 stars, brilliant song. And then Street of Dreams is just gorgeous. So as you can see, this album, Surrender the Rain, is a great track as well. And then a nice cover of Say We'll Meet Again at the end. This Nearly Was Mine, I can't remember too much about that. I think it's quite decent. Yeah, spoilt a little bit by the tracks which I think pad it out a bit. But that's fairly minor criticism, because after all, I'd put it at number one, and I'm wouldn't mind getting this on vinyl, even if it is a double album. So that was my top 8 Fleetwood Mac. I hope you can see, I can put a book behind it in case it's see-through. This is my top 8, my favourite Fleetwood Mac solo albums. You probably don't agree, and that's fine. It's just my opinion, and it's actually based on just what's in my collection. I've also listened to some Bob Welch solo stuff, which is quite decent, but I need to explore that a bit more, and also the rest of Peter Green's catalogue. I have tried to get into the earlier Fleetwood Mac, and Bare Trees is a particular favourite of mine of the earlier period. But that was as of now, my top 8 favourite Fleetwood Mac solo albums. Thanks for watching. See you next time.